as I said earlier, it's excellent actually, and many congratulations to everybody involved. I don't know, it's not like the official, is it the first birthday, or are you celebrating it as a birthday, or I don't know. It's not really the birthday, is it?
It feels a bit that way, yeah.
Okay, well, congratulations, I think, and it's been really amazing, and I was also listening in into the updates, and it's great, and it's lovely to also be connected and see what is happening across the different work streams. I was asked to give an inspirational speech. Well, that's very, humbling, and I feel very honored. Usually I'm indeed looking for inspiration when I join these types of meetings, to hear from others, but I will try my my best and, give you maybe, well, inspiration, hopefully, but also something called a reality check. And I hope that does not end up to be seen as, oh God, this is all hard and difficult. So, take it as a, optimistic encouragement, because I think, there is so much that Naturance can do and can achieve, and you're already doing so much, but I think the potential for impact is massive. So, just in case my inspiration sounds maybe at times a bit demoralizing, that's not the intention, okay? So I thought I'll start with, just sharing some thoughts on where the topics nature and insurance are. And then I'll finish with a couple of, suggestions. Yeah, I wouldn't call them recommendations, but, maybe some food for thought. And really, it's also on how we can have even bigger impact, and where I think, the sector and the topic is going, or where it's not going. So, well, let's start. For those of you who know me, my background, so I'm wearing, quite a lot of different hats. But today I'm sort of speaking here, also representing the LSE team. I also have a role at Marsh McLennan, and I'm the chair of the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative. I also sit on the UK's Committee on Climate Change. And I mentioned that before because all of these roles are kind of connected, and there are actually a lot of opportunities for what Naturance is doing. And I will point out a couple of them, and then hopefully we can build on that. So to begin with, let me just think back. Nature and insurance, I mean, it's great how we're using these terms now in one sentence, but, when I started working in this field, or even younger, when I was, much, much younger, this wasn't the case. So I started my journey on nature and insurance, a long time ago. And my first sort of task that I set myself was, I started, as a lot of kids are, very passionately feeling about the environment. I started to write a letter to the Pope at the age of 10 and demanding him to tell people to stop pollution and cutting down trees. And I wasn't even Catholic, and my parents were shocked and horrified when they got a letter from the Vatican addressed to me. So it's a long story. I'm just saying. And I don't know what impact it had. So I thought, well, I'll give it a go. So anyway, then I grew a bit older and slightly, more realistic. I did an internship with Greenpeace, learning all about pollution. And then I did an internship with Munich Re, where I was actually tasked recording data on nat cats. And that was the first thing, when you use nature and insurance in one sentence, was usually around natural disaster. So nature seen in that context. But I think the penny really dropped when I was, I think, just finishing school. I was doing a work camp in the Swiss mountains, where with an NGO we were planting trees. And then it occurred to us that the reason that initiative got a lot of support was not just because of, the idea that, we need to sort of look after the forest and help sort of protect them, that there was also a massively important service that these forests were playing in terms of avalanche protection. And, you know, I had really interesting discussions. And I think that's when the penny dropped and when I sort of connected it back to the work I was doing at Munich Re. So, look, I mean, I'm obviously much older now, but I think, you know, it just also helps to see how I think, you know, individuals come to that, drawing these connections. Because in my experience now, working with a lot of companies, even with policymakers, often people will share with you kind of stories of, I don't know, what they experienced, you know, their own personal story. I mean, there's this famous example that we only have the EU Floods Directive because I think it was Michel Barnier at that time. I think he was French Interior Minister or so. And there was an issue with his mother's house being flooded. And, you know, the level of flood protection was different to cross the river on the German side. I mean, you know, I'm simplifying, but it just gives you a story. You know, there are often stories. And I think this is particularly important also on the nature and insurance side. So when I started working then more in insurance, I mean, I already mentioned the focus then was really much focused on the risk that nature poses to society, to our asset, and not really on risk to nature. I mean, there was obviously also a lot of focus on environmental pollution and environmental liability, but I think, you know, you use the term nature was often seen, you know, natural catastrophes. And then there was nature, you know, as a risk factor. And one of the most infamous episodes of my own experience, I was working at the Insurance Association of British Insurers, and I was tasked to respond in the media, on television, to report that an environmental lobby group had, or an environmental NGO had put out, was called the Chainsaw Massacre. And it was basically accusing, I think, pretty much the whole British insurance industry of cutting down unnecessary number of trees because of concerns about root damage, subsidence, and issues around trees. And I, you know, just that sort of chainsaw massacre, our insurers are killing trees. Yeah, no, that wasn't, you know, it was very effective. It got them onto television, and it also triggered a lot of discussions. I'm not quite sure, you know, how long it took to change some systems, but I mean, in my view, there was always a very simple solution. You know, well, if for any reason you have to cut down a tree because it's too close to the house or it's causing damage, I mean, you know, nobody wants to have trees falling on roads and cars and whatever. Well, just make sure that there is a balancing, that we also ensure that, you know, enough new trees are planted elsewhere, maybe a bit further away from, you know, from assets. And I think some insurers embraced that concept. But, you know, it kind of took that sort of chainsaw massacre concept. And then I think there was slowly this growing awareness of nature-based solutions. But unfortunately, again, one of my biggest engagements there was not a very positive one, because there was suddenly a lot of concerns from insurers about urban green roofs and fire risk. And, you know, there I think that there is evidence, or at least at that time, you know, this was like in the sort of mid 2000s or so. So there was evidence that green roofs, you know, increased fire risk, particularly if they were not maintained properly. So, you know, there's always often, you know, here's a solution, oh, and then there are the problems. And again, I'm not saying that to be, you know, to sound the alarming bell or be too cautious, but I think it's important to remember that a lot of these things are also not black and white, and particularly if you are thinking about including something so complex as nature and ecosystem service into a sector that is, you know, that has evolved over a long time, is not known for, swift innovation. I mean, you have to understand, I think, these challenges. So if we fast forward to kind of where we are now, I know, notice clearly there's a different notion around nature emerging in the sector, and I don't think we would have this project if it wasn't for that. And we obviously have the sort of leaders in this as part of Naturance, and it's slowly gaining traction. I wouldn't say it's being mainstreamed, because it's this concept of nature or nature positive insurance. In fact, I don't like that term, but we can discuss that later on. But it's really, it's still very niche and very new, and it's very complex for the sector. And this idea that insurance is a mechanism that can support biodiversity and help channel more investments. I know we understand it, we see it, we look at, the logic there, and we all like the concept, but it's still quite niche. And I think, this is, sometimes it's quite easy, and I experience this a lot, that you kind of get locked into an echo chamber. So, if I talk to my colleagues who work on this topic, we're on the same page, we're very excited, we're looking at innovations, but that is actually not representative of what is happening day to day in terms of underwriting, in terms of investment decisions. So again, it is really important, while trying to drive innovation and support it, also to recognize, look, we are actually talking to a very small subset of a big sector. And, maybe even raise that, what does it take to actually go beyond that subset? And so I think that is maybe a little bit of a challenge for all of us, but it's also an opportunity. And just to give you an example, I had a chat yesterday with the CEO of a large insurance company, and he said, look, the nature agenda, really important to our clients and colleagues, and we're sort of fully embracing it. And then after he had left that conversation, one of his senior managers was actually sighing and said, oh, look, this is becoming more and more complex. We have to do net zero. We have to do resilience and adaptation. We have to do nature. We have to do just transition. How am I supposed to come up with the best answer here and translate that into products? And ideally do that all at once and very quickly. And yeah, I mean, I have a lot of sympathy with that view. Obviously, I understand why it is important that we try and combine and have holistic approaches to disaster risk management, adaptation, net zero, and doing it in a fair and nature sort of balanced way. But achieving that, wow, that is significant. So what I thought, I'll leave you with a few ideas and maybe sort of recommendations, building on from that sort of story and my own experience. So I think the first point I would say is, never assume that we're on the same page when it comes to nature. And there are many individual communities in this space, and they use a lot of different terminologies and concepts. And just to give you another example, one of my first jobs here at Marsh McLennan were actually to establish a glossary. I'm happy to share that with this group. It's a glossary around nature terms. And I guarantee you, when you, as the experts coming from different, experts communities, having worked on this for a long, long time, look at these, I can see already some of you scratching your head and saying, wow, Swenja, are you sure that those are the right, interpretations? And some of you might be using other ways of looking at it. And I think that is really important to recognize, because, somehow terminologies are important, and to also establish some common ground. And yeah, I think, since Naturance is, it's still at an early stage, but I don't know if that could be something to also do, so I mean, I know there are lots of glossaries and things out there, but, I think maybe some form of, a Naturance guide to some terms. You might have already done that. If so, great. If you think it's well covered, also not a problem. But, let's also keep in mind terminologies is important. And then I think the next point, I mean, Naturance, we've kind of specifically chosen one of the most complex areas. It's like nature, ecosystem services, biodiversity, and then climate change and finance. I mean, well, we find this all very exciting and we wouldn't be part of this project. But if you try and explain this and also try and move into, delivery, move from, theory to concept and so on, it still remains hugely complex. And for a lot of these pilots that are out there, I mean, they're really driven by a lot of academic input, and that's great, and we should all celebrate that. But in order to get to the next level, in order for me to go to my colleagues and say, look, I mean, I think there's really a chance to scale something. For that, I think we're still far from that. And I guess, that is also one of the ambitions of Naturance, to support that and to see how can we move, and maybe disentangle the complexity. And that translation of knowledge is essential. But I think at the same time, we also need to be careful that we're not over-promising, because with nature, everybody looks or is hoping for some simple modeling tools and easy solutions. And that is important. But I think that's also where in the past often things have gone wrong. And I'm pretty nervous about what's currently happening around TNFD. I don't know how many of you are involved in the TNFD sort of community. And I can say I'm sort of watching it from the periphery. It's a massive amount of work. It's very laudable, and there's a strong focus on modeling and data. And I mean, it's really amazing what they've done and where it got to. But it still remains hugely complex. And I think most insurers and also most other companies are completely overwhelmed by this and actually are going to really struggle. And going to come up also with potentially some, wrong assumptions and just kind of doing something that might not actually give them the right perspective on what really sort of is happening in terms of their relationship to nature. So, this is not for us as a group to solve, but I think it's important because it also creates a huge opportunity. I mean, we have these taxonomies, we have TNFD. I'm personally involved in also working on the UK taxonomy, which is, well, this being the UK, we're trying to learn from maybe some of the challenges that comes from the EU taxonomy. So the ambition is that our taxonomy will be better than the EU taxonomy. Well, we'll see how that goes. But I can tell you from the way nature is being framed in there, it's really mind-blowing, the level of detail. And, how do you define actually sort of a nature positive agricultural investment? It is complex, and I think that should not scare us, but we should be aware of it. And I think that it underlines why actually this project is so important. And then just linked to that, I think trade-offs. We all like to paint a very positive story, and I think a lot of the case studies that we're looking at, a lot of the in the innovation labs, of course, it's very inspiring to look at the positive story, and everybody likes the coral reef example. But I think at the same time, we also need to be quite open and transparent about the costs, risks, and trade-offs. And I just give you one example. I was in the US this summer visiting a very good friend of mine, in beautiful New Hampshire. And we worked together a long time ago at the university on systems thinking and, in fact, lake pollution. So, we've known each other for a long time. And here she was, like, in despair, as the small lake that she was living on had become basically an ecological disaster this year due to some runoff. It was a big surface water management scheme for the properties around, for the golf course around, and had been designed with nature in mind. So they had really started using great innovations, but there was something wrong in their design, and eventually it led to toxic runoff into a lake. And well, for us, it was annoying as we couldn't swim. But obviously, it's a much bigger challenge. It's probably going to take 3 to 4 years to clear it up. And I'm not saying this to say, oh yeah, look, don't go down that route. I'm just saying, there some of the maybe fears or skepticism that some people have when it comes to nature-based solutions. It is because it's new, okay, well, maybe not so new, and I think there's good evidence, but because they also want to understand, there are also potential downsides, potential trade-offs that need to be managed. And I think, that needs to be, transparent, and, we shouldn't hide away from that. And again, I think that should be an opportunity. And just to kind of finish, I think, I was really grateful to hear this story around the strong focus on co-benefits that you've just outlined. And I always knew, I think when we were designing this Naturance, that, I think co-benefits are really essential, and coming up with good and strong, robust ways of quantifying the co-benefits, that's the way to then also create more acceptance, but obviously also more, opportunity for different players to then say, okay, well, this can justify investment and financing. And I just wanted to say the biggest, or one of the big co-benefits that recently people have asked me about is basically about carbon sequestration and, the impacts that climate change or hazards can also have on these carbon assets. And I know it was listed on that chart, and I know it's kind of part of, I think, the wider consideration. But I would really say there are a few interesting case studies where this is currently being invested. I'm involved in 2 or 3. Also drawn out of the realization that, for example, the wildfires this year, I think in Canada, the emissions of this year's fires will be far higher than from its oil, gas, transport, agriculture sector alone. So, that there's translating that into demand for, okay, well, what can we do? How can we protect? I mean, obviously, there is a lot of focus on wildfires. So I would just sort of bring in that carbon lens and the carbon asset element, particularly also as we go into COP28, where I see there's a much more focus on broadening the transition term, to saying, look, we need to do net zero adaptation in nature together. And well, I think that opens up, again, opportunities, because I know that insurance companies are looking for opportunities there. And then just, to say, I mean, innovation is exciting. I mean, that's why we're doing these innovation labs. But innovation takes a lot of time, and it's hard work, and it is a big investment also for companies in terms of, time, money, and companies are usually not patient. And maybe so my challenge for this group is, we all love the coral reef insurance example, but how many reefs are insured, and where's the uptake? So do not lose sight of, the scaling. I mean, innovating is important, but the scaling is really what matters. And if something is not scalable, well, then move to something else. And an offer from my end, because I know we also talked earlier about sort of linking into networks, knowledge sharing opportunities. I mean, I think this group, Naturance, it has the ideal setup, and it's really great. I mean, I think we have the best reach when it comes to this topic. But I think it's probably always useful to see, are there further elements of how we can spread the message? And I have one opportunity that comes through MCII, the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, that many of you are familiar. They were also actually involved and are a sort of supporting partner. And at MCII, we're thinking about setting up a young professional network for young people who start working in insurance. across the world, predominantly also in developing countries, and trying to connect them and to give them a chance sort of to network, but also to learn and to pick up new ideas, to get a bit of training, mostly virtual. So we're sort of setting that up. And I just thought, listening to also your presentations, that actually Naturance would be an excellent partner in that, and sort of filling the nature part of that journey, and also ensuring that, you know, people who are joining the profession at a very early stage, you know, better understand, you know, what actually nature means in this. And I guess those were so my main thoughts. And maybe just to really also echo, I think, was it Tim who presented also on the investment side? So initially, when I was thinking about what to say, I started thinking, well, should I maybe only talk about the investment side, because we talk a lot about the underwriting side. I mean, I think there is, you know, again, significant potential. I'm happy to also connect you to a few networks, but let's keep in mind that I think private capital accounts for just, I don't know how up to date that stat is, but it's around 14% of total investments in nature-based solutions. So that is very low. And I guess, you know, examples such as Aviva and also other leaders in this space, you know, really great opportunities for us to bring, you know, our robust evidence and support that, and maybe take away also some of the fears around, you know, investing in nature and nature-based solutions. So, well, I hope it was a bit of a reality check, but in a positive way, I hope. And I can only repeat myself. There are lots of opportunities for Naturance, and yeah, let's use them. So thanks for that.